Are we? Where's the? Is it on? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2018 Friel Scanlan lecture. It is lovely to see so many faculty and students and staff and friends and family here with us today. As the spring semester races to an end and decisions about how to spend your time, your limited free time, become, I think, exponentially more difficult, it is wonderful to see all the folks who have gathered here to spend this time now. I think it's very appropriate that for what is our last named lecture of the year, we celebrate the outstanding scholarship of one of our own, Professor Don Harris. And it's appropriate because faculty scholarship is one of the chief avenues through which we as a law school contribute to helping to shape society. And because in contrast to our roles as teachers and in service to the school or the university or the outside community, scholarly pursuits are often somewhat a solitary pursuit. And so it's very nice to come together as a community to recognize and celebrate Don's hard work and contributions to our mission. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Friel Scanlan lecture, I'll provide a bit of context. The lecture is delivered by a faculty member who, in the view of their peers, has developed the most significant piece of scholarship over the past 2 years. And the faculty confers upon our colleague the Friel Scanlan Award. And then the lecture is traditionally based upon the scholarship for which the award was conferred. The Friel Scanlan Lecture was established in 1989 by Francis A. Scanlan, who was a member of the class of 1950, to honor his aunt and uncle, Francis S. Friel and Sarah G. Scanlan Friel. Mr. Scanlan was a successful maritime lawyer who, after earning both a bachelor's degree and a law degree from Temple University, was an adjunct professor here at the law school for more than 20 years, and also lectured at Admiralty law schools in Athens and Rome. And we are grateful to Professor Scanlan and to his family for their generosity and the opportunity to honor Professor Harris here today. Professor Harris, of course, needs no introduction. Whether you know him as a teacher, as a colleague, as a friend, or as all three, you have no doubt been immediately impressed by his thoughtfulness, by his creativity, and by his mastery of the fields within which he works. Time to Reboot, which is the focus of the award and his talk today, is an excellent example of all three. It represents another step in Professor Harris's scholarly focus on exploring how copyright law actually functions in the real world and how it could better be designed to achieve our desired objectives for this field. As many in the room know, Don is not only an outstanding scholar, he is also an insightful colleague. He's a very gifted and caring teacher, and he's a passionate advocate for continually improving both the law school and the university. It's been my pleasure to know Don, or to have Don as an IP colleague for over 10 years. We've known each other, I think, for about 15 years in academia. To have someone here to bat IP ideas around with, ideas that some in the room might find less exciting than we do. To work on developing the IP curriculum with, to work on the moot court team, IP Moot Court team with, and to learn from. And I am thrilled that he has agreed to serve as the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs next year, and look forward to working with him in that capacity. I am keeping this introduction short so that we can all enjoy his talk, and so please join me in welcoming the 2018 Friel Scanlan Lecturer, Professor Don Harris.
Thank you. Thank you. This is nice to see friends, family, colleagues, students. If I were a lesser man, I'd let this go to my head. It really is quite humbling to win such an award, and I'm very grateful for this. And I know that I would not be here. I would not be here without the help of so many people. And if I had to thank everyone, we'd need more than an hour here. But I do want to publicly thank a number of people who have been important. First of all, as Dean Mandel said, thank you guys for coming. I know what time of year it is. I know we're getting close to finals. I know you have other things to do. So thank you guys for coming. It means a lot. The committee for selecting me. I know extremely well the incredibly talented faculty we have here. And so I appreciate them overlooking those people and selecting me. I also want to thank Bob Reinstein, first dean, my first dean. He recruited me. He said, come to Temple. It's the place for you. I will support you when you get here. And he did, supported me as much as I could have possibly hoped. And Temple is the place for me. I also want to thank Joanne Isps. Got a lot of love in my heart for that woman. She supported me as well. She also saw something in me and encouraged me to take on more responsibility. I think that she might refer to it as gently nudging me. I might characterize it a different way, or like a hard shove. But as I look back now, I'm extremely grateful for her encouragement, and I'm very fortunate in that I get to call her a friend. Dean Mandel, have to thank him as well. He's an IP scholar, and so he has had to endure all of my scholarship. He's read it all. I don't even want to read all of my scholarship. So the fact that Greg did so, I appreciate it. And not only that, but he's made all of my work better. I also appreciate, again, the faith that he has in me in asking me to be the Associate Dean. I think it's, again, also something that's rewarding. I know it's going to be a lot of work. Unlike with Provost Epps' gentle nudge, I have no illusions that this is a gentle nudge. I know it's going to be work, but I appreciate the confidence you have in me. Two more thank yous, and one is to my good friends Allison Sprague, Leland Lott. Took time out of their day today, took off work to come in. These are two friends. They don't get any better. They are the reason that I actually finally fell in love with Philadelphia and embraced Philadelphia. I met them at a time when I was a bit homesick and wanted to get back to California. Some people think I wanted to get back to California all the time. Probably a little bit of truth in that. But they showed me Philadelphia in a way that I had not seen before, and I thank you guys for that. Everyone should be fortunate to have friends as special as they are. And my final thanks, last but not least, goes to my wonderful daughter, Sabrina. I just thank her just for being who she is. She is an amazing and wonderful daughter, and she makes every one of my days a better day. It's not that I have all great days, but she makes every one of them a better day. And I invite her down here fairly often ostensibly to have lunch or dinner, but secretly I'm hoping that she comes to me one day and says, Dad, I think I want to go to law school. And she'll think it's her own idea. Okay. Even more specifically, what we're going to talk about is whether internet service providers, such as YouTube or Google, whether they should be liable for the infringing conduct of their subscribers. There's no question that the subscribers are liable. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about whether the internet service providers, whether they too can be liable under these secondary liability principles. And so I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the pre-internet era, and then talk about how things change with secondary liability after the internet. And then we'll move on to the DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. This was Congress's first attempt to regulate the internet and deciding whether to impose liability on internet service providers. Probably the most significant case interpreting the DMCA is the Viacom versus YouTube case. And so I'll use that as a launching pad to talk about how we should interpret the DMCA. Ultimately, what Viacom says is that the DMCA shields internet service providers from liability. So if they fall within certain parameters, no liability. And I argue that perhaps it's time for us to do something different. The DMCA was 1998, we're in 2018. And so as the title suggests, I think perhaps it's time to reboot the system, to take another look at the DMCA. And so I ultimately propose imposing some additional liability. And so we'll talk about that. The internet's been along for a while now, and so some of you might not have been around prior to the internet, or some people might have forgotten what it's like. The way that we communicated before was like this. Chisel and stone. And for those who are familiar with multiplayer games such as Second Life or World of Warcraft, we too had our multiplayer games. Okay, perhaps we had come a bit beyond that, but the internet certainly complicated things. So what was it like before the internet? Again, we're not talking about direct liability. Direct liability has always been clear. But the question is whether others can be liable. Two seminal cases, Shapiro and Gershwin, the court said perhaps. Two things I want to note about this development before talking about those, is that the courts were the ones who stepped in. Congress did not pass an act saying secondary liability. Instead, the court said perhaps we should fashion some new liability regimes. The second thing is that they drew from employment law to establish these principles. So vicarious liability, here the court in Shapiro said, outside of the employment context, perhaps those underlying principles still apply and we should find liability. In Shapiro, the defendant was an owner of department stores, allowed someone to come in and sell bootleg records. And the court said, if there is some kind of financial interest, if the defendant's interests are intertwined with the infringer, then perhaps we should have some liability and fashion this test, this control. If the defendant has some kind of right and ability to control the infringing conduct, and then if they have some kind of direct financial interest, they'll be liable under vicarious liability. Gershwin fashioned contributory infringement. Here, the court said, if there is some kind of knowledge, if you have knowledge of the infringing activity, and then you somehow materially contribute to that infringing activity, again, you can be liable as a secondary liability or indirect infringer. In the Gershwin case, the defendant was the owner of a dance hall where infringing music was performed. They also had the artist. The artists were part of their company. The court said you certainly had knowledge of the infringement. You provided the means. You also had the ability to supervise and control. You should be liable. Okay. Then comes the internet. Okay. Two cases I want to use to talk about how we fashioned, how the courts looked at these secondary liability principles, FRENA and then Netcom. In FRENA, the defendant had a bulletin board service. And back in these days, you had a telephone line and a modem, and you had a computer, and then you can connect to the bulletin board service. One of the subscribers uploaded 170 photos, Playboy photos, that were copyrighted. Playboy sued, and sued FRENA. Said, FRENA, you're violating our right to publicly distribute and publicly display the works. And the court said, yes, FRENA should be liable. Now, what's interesting here is the court found Freenet directly liable, not secondarily liable. The court said knowledge is irrelevant. The fact that you posted these, you publicly distributed them, you publicly displayed them, you should be liable as a direct infringer. The next case is the Netcom case, the first case that California had to decide liability in the infringement context. Ehrlich was a vocal critic and former member of the Church of Scientology. Clemsrud had a bulletin board service, and then Netcom was the internet service provider. Church of Scientology told Ehrlich, stop posting certain documents. These documents are copyrighted. Ehrlich said, I'm going to continue doing so. Church of Scientology then went to Clemsrud and said, please take these down. Clemsrud said, no, we're not going to. Church of Scientology then went to Netcom and asked them to do so. Netcom said, no, we're not doing so. Church of Scientology sued them all. The court said, in terms of whether Netcom and Clemsrud should be liable, directly liable, they looked to the Friel case. And they said, we do not agree with that case. In fact, what they said was, for direct liability, there needs to be some kind of volitional conduct, some kind of causation, and simply providing the means or providing a product that can be used to infringe does not rise to the level of direct liability. They're afraid of the vast reach that could happen here if they impose this direct liability. And what they did, they said, this is similar to someone who manufactures a photocopy machine. And someone takes that, the public takes that photocopy machine and they make infringing copies. The manufacturer of the photocopy machine should not be liable, and what they're doing here is similar to that. The court had a different take, though, with respect to secondary liability. For contributory infringement, the court said they had knowledge. Both Clemsrud and Netcom had knowledge because Church of Scientology told them these are infringing works. Did they materially contribute? And the court said, yes, they did. They contributed because they provided means that aided in the distribution, that also allowed for automatic copying, so you have to reproduce it in the servers. And so that type of contribution is enough to satisfy the contributory infringement. In terms of vicarious liability, the court said control is present. They have the ability to block, they have the ability to suspend, they have the ability to remove. That gives them the right and ability to control the infringing conduct. But the court said that there was no direct financial benefit because all of the users paid one flat fee. There was no additional fee paid for the infringing conduct. There was no percentage of the revenue for the additional conduct. And so in terms of the direct financial benefit and vicarious liability, court found no vicarious liability. Okay. Digital Millennium Copyright Act. What happened after these two cases is we see a slew of cases, and the only thing that's consistent about them is that they're inconsistent. So in some cases, the court says, yes, there is financial benefit, even if it's a flat fee. In other cases, courts say no. Some courts say the fact that they can remove works, that they can suspend a person's account, that gives them the right and ability. Other courts said, no, you need something more than that. And so ISPs, they're afraid of the uncertainty. They say, Congress, help us. Copyright holders, they're concerned about the vast amount of infringement going on, the inability to stop infringement. They say, Congress, help us. Before the copyright holders do so, though, they try to engage in self-help. So they use what we refer to as technological protection measures, or TPMs. And these TPMs allow them to lock up their works. So they can deny access, for example, or even once you have access, they can deny the right to use it or how you use it. So, for example, you need a unique code or a password to access a certain work. And then when you access that work, you can't copy it or you can't download it. This they thought would work. They were wrong. They were wrong. Because what happened was there was a very expensive, extremely expensive cat and mouse game that went on with the content providers and with users. As soon as they would develop these new protection measures, they would get hacked. And then once they got hacked, they sent online, this is how everyone else can do so. There's a famous example for Microsoft. In August 17th, 1999, Microsoft came out with this brand new generation of TPMs. And it was Media 4.0, supposed to allow for secure format for audio and video files. They spent millions on it. On August 18th, 1999, it was hacked and it was sent around onto various websites. This is how you can get past the system and make the files shareable. And so both of them sought help from Congress. And Congress says, we will step in. Now what happens with the DMCA, there are really three components to it. The first component is a preventative measure. Say, we will try to prevent the infringement from happening in the first place. And then there's a remedial measure. In case there is infringement, this is how we can remedy it. And then finally, there's this duty or no duty on internet service providers to actually do any kind of monitoring. So the preventative measures, Section 1201 of the Copyright Act. These preventative measures say that it is now illegal. You cannot now circumvent TPMs. If you circumvent TPMs, you are now liable. You also cannot traffic in tools that can be used to circumvent TPMs. So now they're providing strengthened protection for these TPMs. Okay? The other part, the remedial part, comes with Section 512 and these safe harbors. So if internet service providers comply with certain requirements, then they are shielded from immunity. Okay? They have to do a few things. Okay? First, they're immune if they have no actual knowledge. So they have no actual knowledge of the infringing conduct or no what we call red flag knowledge, similar to constructive knowledge. If you don't have any knowledge, you're going to fit within the safe harbor. You also can't have any financial benefit, no right and ability to control, and then you have to act expeditiously if you get this knowledge. And this part of it is what's referred to as the notice and takedown procedures. And in short, what happens here is once a copyright holder, so a copyright holder still has the duty to monitor sites, but once a copyright holder finds an infringing work, they send a notice to the ISP. The ISP then has to take down the infringing work. The final part of it, no duty to monitor. So Congress said there is no affirmative duty on ISP's part to monitor. Instead, they simply need to wait until they get notice, and then when they get notice, then they have to act. Okay. So the balance is seen really in these two, the preventative measures and the remedial measures. Let's try to prevent the infringement, but if infringement occurs, let's then try to remedy it. But there is no question at all that what Congress was trying to do, the thrust of the DMCA, was to ensure the growth of the internet. Talking about 1998, nascent internet industry, Congress was concerned that any kind of liability, any kind of crippling damages would then stunt the internet. And so they wanted to ensure the growth of the internet and said, we need to protect it. Okay. The early years, right after the DMCA, I say immediately after, maybe a year, DMCA seemed to work okay for about a year. And then there were some significant changes. There are changes in terms of who's now involved. So internet service providers, no longer are they simply passive technical players. Now they're more actively involved. We see ISPs grow to social media sites, sites that are dedicated to audio and video files, news syndications, all sorts of new ISPs that might not have been contemplated at the time of the DMCA. We also have new users. So the emergence of Web 2.0 allow users now to upload works, to copy, to distribute, to share in ways that they did not do so in 1998. Okay. TPMs, despite Section 1201, people are still hacking works. And they're doing so at a phenomenal rate. The TPM, the Section 1201 just does not work. People are doing the same thing they did before. Now there is a public relations fiasco, and so copyright holders all but abandon the use of TPMs. Okay? Infringement. While there was some infringement prior to the DMCA, we are now talking about staggering levels of infringement. We're talking about millions and millions and millions of instances of infringement happening, and so the copyright holders are a bit concerned. YouTube, the ISPs, they're doing pretty good. And we see all sorts of ISPs Google, eBay, Amazon, Netflix, Facebook, all of them started merging, which is what we want. That's what we wanted with the DMCA. And so it's succeeding. Okay. Copyright holders, though, claim file, something's wrong here. Okay. Now we've lost that balance. We've lost it particularly because we no longer have the remedial or the preventative measures, and all we're trying to do is now remedy the infringement. Okay. Many people think at this point the ISPs have a very passive and minimal duty. And so their duty, some might say, is something akin to see no infringement, hear no infringement, speak no infringement, and we won't be liable. Okay? Okay. Viacom versus YouTube. We have two giants in the field now. For those who don't know Viacom, they're owners of MTV, BET, Paramount, CBS, and they sue YouTube. Everyone should know YouTube. And what they claim, they make a number of claims, and it's interesting because one of the claims is that perhaps we should reinterpret the DMCA. Now, they don't frame it as reinterpreting the DMCA. They simply say that YouTube shouldn't fit within the DMCA because they're not the type of ISP that the DMCA contemplated. They also say that even if an ISP fits within the safe harbors of the DMCA, that they should still nonetheless be liable. Novel theories, some of them are reach. And what the court ends up doing, the court interprets and says, ISP is construed broadly. So even though they have new functions, new services, new activities, we're going to include them in the ISPs that get the safe harbor protection. Okay? If you fall within the safe harbor, then you are immune from liability. Okay? So the secondary liability principles are not going to apply. Knowledge. Now this is where a big fight was. What do we mean by knowledge? Again, if you have knowledge of the infringing activity, then you fall outside of the safe harbor protections. And so Viacom argued that they had to have knowledge. There are millions of instances of infringement, and this pervasive infringement is enough to satisfy the knowledge requirement. And the court says no. The court says what we need here are specific, identifiable instances of infringement. That's the knowledge that we're talking about. So whether it's pervasive, whether it's ubiquitous, that's not enough. Okay. Ability to control. When we're talking about the right and ability to control, we're talking about more than simply having the ability to remove works or to block works. The court said we need something more. Didn't define something more, but said simply granting access, removing works, needs to be something more. Okay? And what they had in mind is some kind of ability to influence or participate, having some kind of direct involvement or some high levels of control. Okay? And then, as the DMCA says, they have no affirmative duty to monitor their sites. Okay? I have no quarrel with the way the court interpreted the DMCA. I think that's exactly how it should be interpreted. I think that's exactly what Congress wanted at the time. I do take quarrel in that I think times have changed. DMCA was 1998. We're talking about 2018. In terms of technology and technological development, we might as well be talking about 100 years. There was a lot that has gone on. And so my argument is not that this was wrong, and not that the DMCA was wrong, at least not at the time, but in these changed circumstances in our current condition, that perhaps we should rethink the DMCA. Okay. Why should we not rethink it? It works. It's doing exactly what we wanted it to do. We have all of these new players. We have all of this growth. The internet has grown beyond imagination. And so why tinker with it? Let's continue with the system the way it is. Also, it really places the onus where it should be. Copyright owners are the ones whose works are being infringed. So make them be the ones to enforce their rights. Also, allowing for this notice and takedown really helps users. Because if we had some kind of ex-ante procedure where we blocked the works before they even came up, then we might be interfering with freedom of expression, with fair use, with a number of things. So users get protected with this system, with the DMCA system. Okay. Oh, why not? The system might be antiquated. Okay. Again, the notice and takedown procedure, some think of as The phrase was drinking water from a fire hose. So you can't put enough notices, you can't give enough notices, the infringement just keeps on coming. And then it's a game of whack-a-mole. You stop some infringing here, someone that pops up over here. You stop it over here, it comes up over here. Okay? So maybe, again, something should be done. The incentives for ISPs to innovate, there are no incentives for internet service providers to do anything but play the passive role, to simply sit back and await notice. And so there's no incentive for them to innovate in, for example, filtering technologies or monitoring technologies. And for the most part, they haven't. Okay. But winter is coming, folks. I think there is going to be a change. I sense that perhaps we should change things, and that's my argument, that we should look at things over again. And so my system, or my proposal, is a duty-based system. And what I'm arguing here is that we don't do away with the DMCA, but we layer on top of it this duty-based system so that internet service providers now have a duty to monitor the sites and to filter out content before the infringement happens. And so we're reintroducing these preventative measures. And we're talking about reasonable measures. We now have the capability to filter. We now have the capability to monitor. And so let's use those. And so I'm asking for ISPs to take these reasonable measures and prevent the infringement. If they do so, then they get the benefit of the safe harbor protections. And if they don't, then they should be liable. And as I say here, I base this on this sexual harassment framework. In the sexual harassment context, employers can be liable for the sexual misconduct of their employees. Okay? But they are shielded from liability. They have an affirmative defense as long as they take some kind of remedial measures and preventative measures. So first they have to do things to try to prevent it. For example, educating the employees about sexual harassment by providing notice, and then providing some grievance procedures. If they fail to do this, then they don't get the shield, they don't get the affirmative defense. And so I'm arguing for something similar here. Okay? Why should we do so? How do I justify this? One, I say we're restoring the balance. If we are trying to be true to what Congress intended, Congress had a scheme where there was a preventative measures and where there were remedial measures. And so let's restore that balance. Change circumstances. Again, things are just not different. This is not your mom and dad's ISPs or internet. This is something different. And I have here ISPs have matured. And this is something I was thinking about just yesterday, and I popped it in. What I was thinking about is something along these lines, that in 1998, ISPs could be thought of as a baby. And we need to protect babies. We need to make sure that they're going to grow. And that's what they've done. They're growing up, so they become teenagers, and then they become adults, and then become more responsible. They don't need the same type of protections, and so we should revisit how we're protecting them. Okay? I think it's more cost-effective. I think it's better to prevent the infringement when we can, rather than react to it. I also think that it's more fair, the standard that I propose is more fair to ISPs, and so we don't, because it's a reasonable standard, we're not asking all ISPs to have these systems in place, but we need to look to their technological capabilities, we need to look to the costs, we need to look to whether they have market position, lots of different reasons, but that at least allows us to tailor tailor the protection measures or the filtering and monitoring to different ISPs. Okay. I have one last comment, and that's my system is not perfect. My proposal is not perfect. And I was going to talk about how it's not, but I think I'll just leave it like this. Thank you guys very much. Any questions? Seeing no questions. Stephen?
So to remain relevant in the world of business, a lot of corporations have to be active on social media and include things of copyrighted content to comment on them or to rephrase them in order to remain business. How do you handle in your new system the need for businesses to possibly use copyright infringement, or even smaller businesses unintentionally or without malice using copyright material?
Using copyright material
Without malice,
without malice. I guess my first question would be, is it infringement?
Yes.
Then I'd say that we should enforce it. I think one of the things that you bring up is really one of the criticisms of my proposal, in that my proposal, I ask for this ex-ante system. So before it even gets posted, we're going to block it and it's not going to go up. Well, there might be things that are not considered infringement, like fair use. Fair use is this huge defense that says that we allow people to use other people's works as long as it's fair. And so there are a number of factors for us to determine whether it's fair, but we don't even go through this calculus. We don't even try to determine whether it's fair. Instead, we simply ask ISPs to block it. And so if in your example, we might consider those uses fair rather than infringement, then I think that there might be a problem there. But I also think one way that we could address that is by improving the filtering techniques. And so we might be able to have techniques where we can say if less than 20 seconds of a work or less than a minute of a work is being used, then it's not going to be considered infringement, or you don't have to take it down, something along those lines. Laura?
So this was wonderful. It was a lot of it was news to me, so I learned a lot. And I was wondering whether you had any comments on how the trajectory that you just shared with us in terms of history compares to Congress's approach to ISP liability for things like defamation or hate speech. Has it taken the same trajectory that as Congress at first thought we want to protect these babies,
Right.
And now we really have a problem, and that we have to deal with?
Good question. So does it track? Hard to say. So at the same time that the Dmca was passed, the Community Decency Act was passed. And so outside of the copyright context, we have internet service providers being shielded from liability for certain material that's posted that might be defamatory, that the subscriber or that the person uploading would be liable for, and should the ISP be liable there? I think that the paths diverged early on because there were some findings, because the Community Decency Act was found unconstitutional in some respects. But my sense is that we provide for more protection outside of the copyright context than we do in the copyright context. And I'm sympathetic to arguments that that's right, that that's what we should be doing, that these rights are more important than the economic rights that we see with copyright. Right. Sandy?
So I'm curious about the difference that you might see between internet service providers' filtering system regarding sexual content and violent and graphic imagery, and their a proposed filtering system for copyright infringement.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that they might be able to use the same sort of framework. So why, I guess, why don't you think that sort of system has been implemented, or do you think that there would be difficulties in using that same sort of filter?
So my response would be similar to the response that I gave Professor Little, in that I do think that they're comparable, but that there are differences in the rights that we're trying to protect. But certainly the same type of filtering and monitoring that we can do in that context, we can do in the copyright context. Why we haven't gotten there, I think, is because of the lobbying of internet service providers. Because if we start if we start mandating that they take on these, well, there's going to be a significant cost, at least a significant startup cost to implement these systems. But we're also talking about now making them liable for certain conduct that they're not currently liable for. And so pretty heavy lobbying efforts, I would say. Yeah. Yes. So,
This is great. I learned a lot. It's really interesting. One of the things I want to commend you guys. You're really clear on this assumption that the internet was a baby, but now it's grown up. But I wonder, what makes you think it's grown up? Because I keep thinking, like, if you read what people say, and you look at the amount of investment,
Right.
there's a kind of, like, story that we haven't seen anything yet.
Right. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. 10 years from now, I could look back and say, boy, was I wrong. I do that a lot, by the way. and so maybe that's what. But certainly we are in a different position now than we were in 1998. And so are we an adolescent? Are we fully grown? Really hard to say. But it's not hard to say that 2018 is very different from 1998. Sorry, I think I should call the dean.
So, I don't know about you, but I've sort of noticed that there isn't a lot of legislation coming out of Congress. So I would just be really interested to hear you say a little bit about the politics. You started to a minute ago, like in terms of who are the interest groups here? What kind of political power do they have, and how might something like, is there a chance that even in the current politically polarized environment, that something like what you suggest could actually happen, or is this very pie in the sky right now?
So I won't say pie in the sky. I would say, though, that I'm not all that confident that Congress would step in, but I don't think I need them to, and I'm not really asking them to. What I wanted the courts to do so in the same way that they did so early on with the secondary liability principles. The one legislative act that Congress must do is they need to remove Section 512M that says no duty to monitor, no duty for ISPs to monitor. And if we delete that, then we can allow for these types of filtering and the duty-based system that I'm referring to. Well, I can say this, that the United States is not the only country that has to think about these things. And if we look to countries outside of the United States, we can see a shift. We can see if European Union, for example, now what they've done is there's a directive 2016 called the Digital Single Market Directive that says internet service providers, you must take reasonable measures to prevent the infringement. And what they suggest are filtering and monitoring techniques. So we can see that over there. What they've also done is they've distinguished between what they refer to as passive ISPs and active ISPs. In the United States, the ISPs, while there are differences, for the most part, all of them are still shielded under the Dmca. The European Union approach is to say some ISPs are not going to get this type of liability. And so because we see some shift, some movement outside the United States, it's not that far-fetched that we're going to see some movement here also. At least I don't think that there is. Greg?
So I was going to get your thoughts on the intersection between your proposal and fair use, which you were mentioning before. Because I think there's a really important relationship there, right? Which is right now, I think very accurately described, ISPs can totally turn a blind eye, and so we have over-infringement until the moment they get a notice, when, because fair use is not clearly defined, they're overzealous in taking things down, right, because they don't want liability. So then we get over-enforcement. And so I'd be worried that your proposal, once we place a duty on them to monitor, is we move that earlier in the chain. If we don't also fix fair use, they're overzealous in monitoring and enforcing, and all sorts of fair use content gets taken down.
Yes, and so you have identified the area where I'm most concerned about with my proposal, and that's fair use. So as I just mentioned, fair use, what we do, we allow people to use other people's work as long as it's fair. So the factors that we look at, is it going to interfere with the market that the original copyright owner is? Is it some kind of transformative use? And if it falls, if it does, then we'd say that it's fair. Now, it's not an easy determination or evaluation as to whether something is fair use or not. And so courts struggle with this all the time. And my proposal would simply say, if it's being used, we don't, at least at the initial stage, we're not considering fair use. The ISPs don't have the wherewithal to determine whether something is fair or not fair. And so, yes, I agree that we'd be over-enforcing and we would be cutting out some uses that might be fair. There is a counter-notification process where if a user feels that it is fair, the user can say, no, I think this is fair, and then we have a system, a dispute system where we can work that out. But I also think that the technology, that we can develop technology where we can start thinking about or implementing something that might be fair. So as I was mentioning to Stephen, if we have filtering technology that says if you use less than a minute of someone's work, that's going to be considered fair. We're not there yet, and I'm not all that confident that we're going to develop a system that really that's going to address fair use as effective as we might like. And so what I'd say to you is, talk to me in a few years. Let me think about it. That is really the issue that I think is a real problem with the proposal. But I think any system where you have an ex ante mechanism is going to fall prey to that. But I don't think that means that we don't move forward. So I'd say that we need to determine, there are a number of things that we have to figure out. We need to figure out the cost, we need to figure out the effectiveness, we need to figure out unintended consequences. And so if the calculus is that we are blocking more fair uses, then maybe we think of a different system. Right? Bob?
So I think it's great. Like everybody else, I learned a lot from this. I was intrigued by your analogy to sexual harassment. I never understood why employers shouldn't be vicariously liable for sexual harassment by their employees, especially if they're employees or managers. And when you started with the case law pre-internet on the doctrines of vicarious liability, those seem to me to be really reasonable. Why not just go back to them?
I think you're right about sexual harassment. In fact, I think that we probably have the systems backward, that we protect employers too much, and so cases that we see in the sexual harassment context, employers get off more often than I think we'd like to see. And so I don't disagree with you there. In terms of why we don't stay with the initial contributory liability, I'm not suggesting that we don't, but the problem is that if you fall within the safe harbors, then those don't come into play. And we need something then to get it. So if they don't come into play, then we're always going to be in this system where internet service providers get shielded. And so my view is that we need something else where we can start imposing some liability. And so we could just simply say the DMCA, let's get rid of the DMCA and let's go back to that system. Let's go back to, right. But I think that the DMCA does serve, there is certainly a benefit. I don't think that we would be where we are right now without the DMCA. And as Salil suggested, I'm not sure that we have gone as far as we need to go. And so I'm not suggesting that we do away with the DMCA. But what I'm suggesting is that the DMCA was designed for a system or an environment where there is much less infringement. And one way we can make the DMCA more relevant is to say, let's see if we can cut down some of that infringement. And so if we have these preventative measures, then the DMCA can perform in the way that it was supposed to. Thank you guys again. Appreciate it.